right, so in our last video, we talked about elections and campaigns. In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about campaign finance. So as you might assume, campaigns are really expensive, okay? In the 2016 presidential election, Hillary Clinton raised $563 million, while Donald Trump raised $333 million. So spending in campaigns, especially presidential campaigns, can reach into the billions of dollars. Now, money is not necessarily needed for winning an election, but it's definitely going to be needed for running a campaign. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of those reasons in the next slide. So, all of that in mind, the danger of money in politics and the need for regulation of campaign donations and expenditures has been recognized for a really long time. So, throughout history, there have been different types of campaign finance law, that have been put in place. But candidates and campaigns have also challenged these laws and tried to find ways around them. So an important thing to understand when it comes to campaign and campaign finances are political action committees, because they are a big part of campaign finance. These are defined as organizations that raise money to elect and defeat candidates that can also donate money directly to a candidate's campaign. So political action committees are going to collect funds from members and distribute those funds to candidates and political causes. Okay, so essentially, these are just going to be organizations that are going to help fund a candidate's campaign. All right, so let's talk a little bit about why candidates need money. Okay, why does spending get so large? So media time on TV, radio, in print, and on social media. So if you're running for office, especially for the presidency, you want people to know your name, know your face, know where you stand on issues. Okay, you are trying to get people to vote for you. You may also hire professional consultants, okay, so the people that work for your campaign that have a lot of experience with campaigns, how people might vote, that are going to try to help you get elected. You're going to have to hire staff, coordinate media strategy, conduct opinion polls, arrange public appearances. So all of those things are going to require a staff that is working for you, a staff that expects to get paid. And then get out the vote efforts. So essentially trying to register people to vote, to mobilize supporters, get as many people voting as possible. So all of that takes money. So let's talk a little bit about some of the history of campaign finance reform in the United States. So laws have been passed over the years to try to limit the influence of money on campaigns. So essentially trying to regulate the amount of money that can be donated to a campaign or influence the outcome of an election. So the first of those is the Federal Election Campaign Act that was passed in 1971. And this act is going to create the Federal Election Commission to oversee campaign finance laws. So some of the things that this act does is place limits on individual and political action campaign contributions, place limits on campaign spending, require the reporting of campaign contributions and expenditures. So the Federal Election Commission is essentially created to oversee all of those things. In Buckley v. Valeo in 1976, the court is going to uphold restrictions on campaign contributions by individuals. And then there is the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, also known as the BCRA, that is going to place even stricter limits on campaign contributions by individuals and political action committees. So before the BCRA, unlimited monetary contributions to political parties were allowed, so long as these funds were spent on party building purposes. So things like those get out the vote efforts and issue advertisements. So advertisements that provide information on an issue, a political issue, but aren't advocating for voting for a specific candidate. So these funds were known as soft money. So this money was dedicated to party building activities. So when the BCRA is passed, it is going to prohibit national parties from soliciting or spending that soft money, and place specific limits on contributions to candidates, parties, and political action committees. So, after this Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, independent groups are not going to be allowed to run ads 30 days before a primary or 60 days before an election. So, it is going to prohibit issue advertisements on television or radio that use a candidate's name, were paid for by corporations or unions, and then are broadcast within that time span. Okay, so those are some of the parts of this BCRA. So that's going to bring us to one of the cases that you are required to know for the AP exam. And this is Citizens United v. the Federal Election Commission, and this case took place in 2010. So Citizens United is going to seek an injunction against the FEC to prevent the application of the BCRA, okay, so that act that we just talked about, to its film Hillary the Movie. So this movie is going to express opinions about whether Senator Hillary Clinton is going to make a good president. Okay, so the Citizens United is this conservative nonprofit organization. Okay, they wanted to release this movie, and it's really going to be a negative portrayal of Hillary Clinton. But they are going to be restrained from that BCRA. So if we go back, you can look at some of the reasons why. So independent groups are not going to be allowed to run ads 30 days before primary, 60 days before an election. So that act is going to apply a variety of restrictions to electioneering communications, and Section 203 of the BCRA is going to prevent corporations or labor unions from funding such communication in their general treasuries. So the real question here is, does the BCRA ban an election advertising violate the First Amendment right to free speech? So does Citizens United, a nonprofit corporation, have this First Amendment right? So is this group allowed to release this movie? Is this part of their free speech? So the court is going to strike down portions of the BCRA and rule that corporations under labor unions are persons under the law and protected by the First Amendment. So they're going to say that the BCRA ban on election advertising violates the First Amendment right to free speech and is unconstitutional. So Citizens United, even though it's a corporation, it does have that free speech right. Okay, so it is a nonprofit corporation and therefore has that First Amendment freedom of speech. So under the First Amendment, corporate funding of independent political broadcasts in candidate elections cannot be limited. Political speech is indispensable to democracy and is no less true because the speech comes from a corporation. All right, and the last thing we're going to talk about in terms of campaign finance are super PACs. So these are organizations that are independent expenditure-only committees. So they engage only in outside spending and do not contribute to parties or candidates. So the result of that case that we just talked about are those super PACs that are allowed to spend unlimited amounts on a political campaign. So unlike those traditional political action committees, they're not limited to how much they can spend and how much they can raise, but they're not supposed to directly coordinate with campaigns. So they can spend an unlimited amount of money on a campaign as long as they're not coordinated with a campaign, and they can raise tons of money to advocate for or against a candidate. Okay, so you can see some of those super PACs that are listed here. So the outcome of that case, okay, Citizens United v. the FEC, okay, is that corporations have that First Amendment right. So this is where super PACs come from. They're allowed to spend unlimited amounts on a political campaign as long as the spending is not actually coordinated with that campaign. So that's where we're going to stop with this video.